Hello, happy Sound to my pagan friends and a happy Halloween to everybody else. This is a dark tale to celebrate the Halloween season with. It's a story of Russian origins. Father Nikolai was an old man. He had come to that parish as a young man, a priest newly ordained, and he'd been given an impressive house, he'd been given brocade curtains, he'd been given nice warm clothes, there were gold candlesticks upon the mantelpiece, there were gold and silver crosses hanging from the walls, as befits a priest's house. But Father Nikolai had always been a compassionate soul, and he'd seen the poverty in the village. He had seen people fall ill, people suffer tragedies, people barely able to eat. And so, as the years had rolled past, Father Nikolai had sold off the gold candlesticks, sold off the silver crucifixes, sold off the brocade curtains. One thing after another had gone, the money had been given to the poor and to the needy. And eventually, in midlife, he decided to sell off even his own house. And some of the money he used to buy what was really little more than a shack, a humble little home, 2 miles outside the village up in the mountains. And the rest of the money had been spent on repairing the church roof and going to feed the poor and the hungry and the destitute. And his parishioners had said, "Is this wise, Father Nikolai? You're getting old. Can you keep coming down the 2-3 miles from the mountains to the church every day?" And Father Nikolai said, "It is my duty, I will come." And good as his word, the priest, every day, had come down from the mountains and at the end of the day gone up back to his hut in the mountains. But the years had rolled past. His hearing had become much less acute. His bones had become frail, and his eyesight had faded and faded and faded as the cataracts grew thicker and thicker, until now, an old man with a long white beard. He could see blurring movements, he could see the occasional flash of colour, the rough outline of shapes, but beyond that he was almost blind. Yet he had made that journey down from the mountains so often that, as he told his parishioners, he could do it as well with his sight as it was, as they could do it with their full 20/20 vision. One winter, the snows fell particularly heavy. The wind howled particularly hard and rattled the doors and the windows of his little cabin up in the mountains. And the old priest sat huddled by the fire, a blanket wrapped round his shoulders, thinking he really ought to take some furs out of the box which his parishioners had given him the very day beforehand when they'd brought up a load of logs for the fire, knowing he was now too old and frail to actually chop his own wood and food for him to eat. And he stirred the cauldron that was over the fire with a humble stew of vegetables inside, and he was just about to go to the chest and get some furs to wrap round his shoulder when there came a knock upon the door. And he thought, who on earth could be coming in this weather at this time of night? Surely this must be a tragedy. Someone is ill or dying and my services are needed. And at once he went to the door and he opened it, and the wind howled through and the snow came through, and he said, quickly, come inside, and shut the door behind his visitor. And he turned, and in the firelight and the candlelight inside his little hut, he could see a big, tall shape, and he thought, he's a man. And he said, my son, which of my children are you? For his eyesight was now so bad he couldn't tell one parishioner from another most of the time. And the man said in a voice which the old priest did not recognise, Father Nikolai, I am no son of yours. I am a stranger in these parts. And the priest thought, what on earth are you doing out in weather like this? Come sit by the fire, you must be so cold. And he made to touch the man upon the shoulder and steer him towards the chair, when the man hissed and pulled back and said, touch not, Father Nikolai, touch not. And the priest's hands were wet. From the snow that had melted upon the man's shoulder, they were sticky. But curiously, when Father Nikolai had so briefly touched that man's shoulder, there would be no coat, no cloak, no shirt, nothing but a bare shoulder. My son, sit by the fire, and he piled wood upon the fire to get the room nice and warm and hot, and still he could hear the man shivering and shaking. Have you eaten? When was the last time you ate? And the man said, not for many days, Father Nikolai. And at once the old man took his wooden bowl and spooned the vegetable stew into the bowl and said, "Take, take, eat, eat." And the man peered into the cauldron and he said, "Father Nikolai, have you eaten today?" And the old priest said, I don't need to eat today. I had something for lunch. That is sufficient. Let us think of this as a day on which I shall fast. Now you eat, eat." And he listened to the man spooning food down. And he poured him a little vodka, and the man took that too. And he said, You must be so cold, I can hear your teeth rattling. Do you travel naked?" And the visitor, the man said, "Everything, Father Nikolai, has been taken from me." "You've been robbed? In this weather? And they left you naked in the snows? That is tantamount to murder, my son. A terrible crime to commit. Tomorrow, you stay the night here, and tomorrow we will go into the village and report this terrible crime. Let me get you something to place around your shoulders." And again, without thinking, he leant out a hand and briefly touched the man's shoulder. Not once again he pulled back, hissing and spitting and saying, "Touch not, Father Nikolai, touch not." And his shoulders were still damp and it was sticky, and Father Nikolai wondered, had this man been wounded when he was robbed? Was that blood he could feel upon this poor man's shoulders? But first things first, the man needed to be warm. And Father Nikolai went to the chest in the corner and opened it up and took out the furs that his parishioners had given him the day before and said, My son, place this around your shoulders. It will keep you warm as you huddle by the fire." And the man reached out and took the fur. "This was a gift to you, Father Nikolai." "Oh, yes, my parishioners brought it yesterday, but now I make a gift of it to you. It is yours to keep. Mine to keep." "Yes, yours to keep." And he could see the movement as the man wrapped the furs around his shoulder. And this time there was no hissing, no intake of breath with pain. The man stretched, and Father Nikolai could see the movements of him. And he heard a deep, deep sigh of relief. And he thought that man must have been so cold to be so relieved now that he has the furs wrapped around him. And again, on instinct, without thinking, he reached out a hand and he patted the man on the shoulder and said, there, my son, there. And this time the visitor did not pull back, did not flinch, did not whimper in pain. And Father Nikolai could feel how big and broad and powerful this man was. And he wondered at what robbers would dare attack so well-built a man. "You have eaten, you have drunk, will you rest a while? A good night's rest and you will feel much the better in the morning, my son." The man prowled around the small cabin and said, "I will rest a while with you, Father Nikolai." And he lay down upon the floor in front of the fire and said, Sit in the chair, Father Nikolai." And the old man made his way to the chair. And he began to tell his visitor stories of his life as a priest, stories of his parishioners, their comings and goings, their happinesses and their tragedies. He told him all of the local myths and legends of the strange creatures of the mountain, the fairy folk, and the ancestral tales of the village. And the man lay upon the floor listening, and the old priest would hear a thump, thump, thump. And he wondered what it was, but he was too polite to ask, and it reminded the priest of nothing so much of his old dog that he'd had as a young boy, of how his tail would wag and thump against the floor when the dog was happy. And at length the old priest began to nod off. And it wasn't until several hours later, when a blast of cold air woke the old priest up, that he staggered to his feet and, moving around, realised that the visitor was no longer sleeping upon the floor, and he heard the door bang shut. And he peered out the window, and there was light enough that it must have been early hours of the morning by then. But he could still hear the wind howling. He could still hear the snows falling. And he thought, the man is crazed. If he needed to answer a call of nature, he could have done so in here and used the pot. And he waited a few minutes, thinking the man would come back in from the snows, and a few minutes more, and a few minutes more, and he realised the man wasn't coming back in. And he began to panic and worry. And the man never did come back in. But that very evening, when Father Nikolai returned from his day tending the church and the congregation down in the village, he found piled up outside his door a heap of logs and 3 dead rabbits, their throats ripped out, placed for him to eat. And as he took the rabbits and the logs inside and shut the door behind him, he heard the howling of wolves in the distance. And he thought at once of the wolf's skin in the box that he had given his visitor. And every night, throughout the whole of the winter, and the next winter, and the next winter, and the next winter, Father Nikolai was kept in fresh meat and firewood by a mysterious visitor who would come in the night and leave gifts for the kind and generous priest. Happy Halloween!